A couple more countries, and then we'll get to some other questions. But your thoughts on Iran?
Iran is a country that, obviously has a lot of dissidents inside it right now. You've got really it's a theocratic regime where you have the spiritual leader, and then they have elections, sort of, kind of, that are electing people that meet, quote, the theocratic leader's approval. It's much more sophisticated as a country than people think in many ways, but they also are the #1 carrier out of terrorism in the region. I think that it would have been, I didn't support the Iran agreement once it was in place, and we knew President Trump's view of it, which we shared, that it was not a very good deal. We tried to work on a sunset provision with the nuclear agreement they had, so that unlike the way the agreement was negotiated, which after 10 years they were off and running, mostly off and running, able to really crank their program back up. We wanted to do away with the sunset provision so that we could put sanctions in place if they ever got below a 1-year breakout time. I'm okay both applauding and criticizing the administration depending on what they do. I'll have to say in this case, the steps they've taken since the sunset provision could not be done away with, I think have been appropriate. And we've really lessened the amount of oil they're able to sell on the markets right now. Huge amount of inflation inside the country. I don't think that this go-around they can go forever with this type of economic pressure.
How about Yemen and the humanitarian crisis we're seeing there, in addition to the politics?
Yeah.
Is that something that...
Look, it's a terrible situation. The Houthis, who are supported a proxy of Iran. The main port of entry has been contested, where humanitarian goods come in. In addition to humanitarian goods coming in, there's also been arms that have come in, and so there's been, closures, opening, closures. People are dying of diseases that are easily preventable, like cholera, and it's just a catastrophe. I think because of the journalists being killed, in my opinion, at the direction of the Crown Prince, it's possible that the United States steps up its game to try to end this terrible crisis, because I think the administration sees that any attempt to sell arms to Saudi Arabia right now is going to be killed, likely, in Congress. And therefore, instead of embarrassing, having a situation with an ally where all of a sudden we're no longer selling them U.S. equipment, which we have been for years. And by the way, if people are going to buy military equipment, we want them to buy our equipment, right? And it creates a relationship with them that otherwise wouldn't exist in some cases. But I think because they know the temperature right now in Congress relative to Saudi Arabia, they're going to be moving quickly to try to figure out some way of having a ceasefire in Yemen. So something positive could come out of this terrible thing that happened to the journalist.